Hello and welcome back. In this episode I'll be sharing an idea for a simple lever puzzle, one that you can make using this printout that you can see here on the screen. And like always, it's a pay what you want PDF that you can pick up from TTRPG, so if you want to grab it for free, just put a 0 in the little box. However, you are going to need to make some dungeon tiles to go along with this one. In particular, a room with 4 exits, 2 passage tiles, here I've gone with some stairs but that's not really all that important, and a couple of small rooms or dead-end passages. If you've been following the channel for any length of time, you'll probably already have all of these, but if not, if you watch my last video, I run through the technique quickly there. Anyway, it's a bit awkward trying to get all of this into shot as I don't have all that much space to film in, but the layout for this encounter is going to be something like this. So yeah, as I say, you will need some dungeon tiles, or have the area sketched out on a battle mat to make use of the terrain I'm about to make, though you could just as easily run the encounter theatre of the mind if you prefer, just using the player handouts that are provided. But I am primarily a terrain channel, so not surprisingly, I'm going to make some terrain. Right then, the first thing we'll need to make are some of these archways that are blocked by a stone slab, and these are made in the same way as the doors that I've shown multiple times now, so I'll not bore you with the assembly of these, though again, if you're new here, I also run through the doors briefly in the last episode as well. But yeah, there are 4 of these, and you will notice that there's 2 sides with numbers engraved on them, and you just need to make sure that these are on 2 different pieces. Otherwise, as I say, it's the same technique that I always use for making regular doorways. Okay, to make the lever itself, we can cut out these 2 pieces, leaving a slight border around the edges, and these can be glued to cardboard of some description. Here I'm using some really thin corrugated card, as that's what I had lying around. And I'll just use a glue stick for this, and like I say, glue that to the cardboard. Then we'll need to leave that a few minutes to dry, so to save time, here's one that I made earlier. And that can then be cut to size with a sharp knife and a metal ruler, just like you can see me doing here. There you go. It's then a simple matter of doing the same thing with the other piece, and then gluing one on top of the other. And I'm just using the glue stick again for this. Then, when that's done, that should look something like this. Okay, now for the lever itself, we'll need to cut out this texture, and we'll also need a toothpick or cocktail stick. Some glue can then be added to the back of the paper piece, which in turn can be wrapped around the stick. So that, when we're done, this is how it looks. It's then a fairly simple matter of taking a sharp knife and cutting away the parts that are not covered in the paper texture, like so. Now, you might have noticed that I've also included this small texture on the page, and this is just in case you happen to have a hole punch that's around the same diameter as the top of the lever. Though, don't worry if you haven't, this is just an optional extra. But if you do have something like that, then you can glue this additional piece into place to cover up the exposed end. So, there you go, here's how the lever looks when it's finished. And it's then just a matter of gluing this into place on top of one of the slots of the gearbox texture. And when the glue's dry, that should end up looking something like this, which is going to be the focal part of the encounter. So there's not all that much to make really, just this lever mechanism and the 4 archways that I mentioned earlier, and now that all that's done, I can talk a bit more about the encounter itself. Okay then. The way I've got things set up here is that the characters will descend the stairs and enter the room from the east. And when they do, you can lay out the tiles and describe the room as having 3 other archways that look like doorways, but they're all blocked with the huge stone slab. In addition, at the very centre of the room, there's a large wooden lever sticking up out of the floor, which seems to be part of some kind of mechanical device. And you can also describe other sights, sounds and smells that are relevant to the type of dungeon that you're running. Things like the type of stone the walls are made from, for example, or if the whole place is damp, things like that. Anyway, if the PCs examine the lever, you can then pass the handout around the table and explain how it looks like it can be moved into 5 different positions, each of which are numbered from 1 to 5. The wooden handle is old and the metal plate on the floor is rusty, but it looks functional, though it will prove to be extremely stiff and will take a bit of effort to move. If they then examine either of the north or south archways, they won't really discover anything else of interest, though you as the GM should note that the stone slabs blocking these entrances, they should be near impossible to move or break. On the other hand, if the PCs check out the western arch, they'll discover that the stone block here is engraved with a series of numbers, and again, you can pass the handout around the table so that the players don't have to squint at the terrain to try and read it. Now, this is a fairly straightforward puzzle, as it's just a matter of simple addition to solve it, but I will run through it anyway, just for the sake of completeness. So the lever will first need to be moved over into the number 2 position, as that matches the first number on the door. Next, it can be moved into the number 3 position, as 2 plus 3 equals 5, and 5 is the second number. After that, it needs to be moved over and into the number 1 slot, because 5 plus 1 equals 6, which is the third number on the door. And finally, the lever needs to be moved all the way over to the right and into the number 5 position, because 6 plus 5 makes a grand total of 11, to match the final number in the sequence. If that's done, a stone block slams down in the passage behind them, blocking off the way that they came in, and then a couple of seconds later, the stone slab in the west wall rises up like a portcullis, granting them access into a deeper part of the dungeon. And, if you like, you can use the remaining archway for the one blocking off the entrance, as this one has a different set of numbers engraved onto it, but it works in the exact same way. Anyway, if I just rewind slightly and go back to the start, I do just want to add that the way I've usually run this encounter is that the mechanism always resets after being moved into the 4th position. So, if, for example, a character experimented with the lever first, just to see if it could be moved, and maybe they slid it into the number 1 position, that will be considered the first move. So, in this instance, even if they figure out the sequence pretty quickly and then start moving the lever into the right positions after that, they've already used up the first move, and as such, can only move it another 3 times before it resets, and then they'll have to start again. And if that happens, that would mean that they've used an incorrect sequence, and as you've probably guessed, when the wrong sequence is used, something bad happens. So, in my example, a stone slab falls across the entrance, trapping one or more characters inside the room, and then both of the other blocks rise up, releasing something nasty, with the obvious choice being some kind of monster for the characters to battle. And another thing I like to do, just to prevent the doors being instantly slammed shut again, is, as I mentioned previously, to explain that the lever is extremely stiff and takes a few seconds to get it into position. So, once initiative has been rolled, a character can only really move it once each combat round. Or maybe twice, if they make some kind of strength-based test. This just means that they will have to battle the monsters for at least a couple of rounds. But that's pretty much all there is to it. A correct sequence grants access to more of the dungeon. A wrong sequence triggers something unpleasant, and the characters can attempt the sequence as many times as they like, until they get it right for one of the doors. So, with that in mind, you might like to think up other penalties for subsequent failed attempts, like maybe the second time they get it wrong, poison gas is pumped into the room, the third time they set off some kind of magical trap, and things like that. But, like I say, at its core, it's a fairly simple puzzle, so it shouldn't cause your players much of a problem. So yeah, I think that's everything covered. If I didn't explain it very well, then just post any questions that you might have down below, and also let me know how it goes if you do use this one. Anyway, all that's left to say is thank you very much for watching, and with any luck, I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.